Well, if it wasn't a school night, I'd be getting as drunk as Josh Hart appeared to be for most of that game right about now. But, Jesus. Welcome to the Knicks Film School Postgame Show presented by BetUS. Hey, that's a win. The Knicks won a game, a basketball game, ostensibly, against the Philadelphia 76ers. I actually think, you know what that win tells us? It tells us a lot about. It tells us about the teamwork and the camaraderie in that locker room, because for them, and obviously I'll throw in the coach in here too, for all of them to collectively nearly blow that game just so Jalen Brunson could pad his clutch time stats and maybe put himself in the lead for the Jerry West Clutch Player of the Year award. That's downright inspiring stuff by the Knicks, let me tell you. Unselfish right there. I don't even know what to say about that game. It's funny, for as crazy as that game was, there's and for as much as I think there's a lot of Knicks fans who just want to start turning off their TVs right now, and feel like, what else do you say about this team right now? I actually think there's a lot to say about this game, and I'm looking forward to getting into it. The first thing I'll start by saying, though, is it's funny. Just it's more like a observation about sports and fandom. I think a lot of us coming off this weekend, I'll include myself in this partially, after the performances that they put forth, were like, nothing's really going to matter in terms of really meaningful conclusions being drawn about this team. Nothing's going to matter until April, right? Or maybe even May, if you want to look at it like that. And you're like, I can only be so invested in the rest of the regular season because they showed us what they showed us, or didn't show us what they didn't show us against Cleveland and Boston. And yet, I know I was sitting there in the fourth quarter being like, do not blow this freaking game, guys, please. Even though in the back of my mind, and I guess this will be the way that we actually start talking about the game itself, there was a part of me in the back of my mind where I was like, they deserve to lose this game. And I think that's maybe a little harsh, but there is something a little off with the team right now, and I want to be very I want to be very careful with my words, because this is a team that I know they played without a non-spacing center for all of last year, and for the entirety of the Tom Thibodeau era, for that matter. So you'd think that they should be used to it, but like, when Karl-Anthony Towns is not on the court, like, they just are not quite themselves. And I give them a lot of credit, and I give Mikal Bridges in particular a lot of credit for going out in the first quarter and giving them that lead. And I think when they came out, and he specifically came out and started with and that was an important first quarter for Mikal Bridges. And I'm going to be a little rough on the Knicks in this game, but Mikal Bridges and obviously Jalen Brunson, they are excused from all this, and a couple other guys I thought had decent games. And I don't want that to get lost in the conversation, because it's important. And like, you don't just focus on the bad, especially after a win. You try to focus on the good stuff, and you always try to focus on the good stuff. Even on Sunday against Boston, there was some good stuff to focus on, and we tried to do that. But I thought, to come out, Mikal Bridges having the best first quarter of his season, arguably the best quarter of his season, for Jalen Brunson to really look for him, to sense that he had it going. And I thought there was this perfect dichotomy in the first quarter. Jalen Brunson, 7 assists, Mikal Bridges, 19 points, which was, again, a season high. And really just like take a team that had lost 8 games in a row and give them nothing to, like, extinguish any hope right away. Like, put them in their place. You go up by 19, you're up, high or high teens for most of the game. And that's when the not so good stuff started to set in. And I thought, after the first quarter in particular, and credit also to the bench, I thought the bench did a nice job of, I thought they had a couple nice bursts in terms of the scoring. But after the first quarter, and after Bridges' little burst in particular, when it wasn't Jalen Brunson doing it on offense, they just couldn't generate anything. And again, it's impossible to have this conversation without talking about Karl-Anthony Towns, and it's also impossible to talk about Karl-Anthony Towns' absence from this game without talking about Tom Thibodeau. And like, could we again? Thank God they won. Thank God they won. But the fact that they struggled as much as they did to beat that team, and I think the other reminder that we got tonight is that the Knicks' defensive issues, and I know the Sixers only scored however many points they scored in this game, 100 and what did they score? 105? Yeah, 105, which on paper was like pretty good. Watching that game and you saw it. Once the Sixers got going, the Knicks defense had all kinds of trouble stopping them. And I understand a lot of that was with a undersized center who's not even really a center in Precious Achiuwa, and the rest of it was with a rookie. So, I don't know how many conclusions you could really draw from any of that, but it was a reminder to me, at least, that for as much as we can point at Karl-Anthony Towns, and I have pointed at Karl-Anthony Towns for his defensive miscues and his impact on the larger defensive struggles for this team over the course of the season, it ain't all him. And, there has been something lacking defensively with this team for the entire season. Now, that being said, they made some big plays down the stretch. Precious Achiuwa had a big play. I don't even know if I want to call it a block. It was funny hearing Monica McNutt being like, that was more of a, I forget what she called it, but it wasn't a traditional block. That, the Hart OG convergence on the Paul George drive, I thought that was a good defensive play as well. There were a couple other, a poke. Yes, thank you, Mark. It was a poke. Best poke of the season. So they came up with some plays, but there were also a ton of possessions, if we're keeping it a buck, that like Sixers got good shots, and they're just a god-awful basketball team with two players who have kind of are in a lull. They're almost at like Tyrese Maxey and Paul George. It almost felt like they were in hibernation for the first half of this game until they kind of were like, oh, wait a minute, we can actually win this game. And then they woke up. But the rest of that team is dreadful. Although Kelly Oubre quietly auditioning, maybe for, I don't know. I don't want to speak out of turn, but like I've always fancied Kelly Oubre Jr. I like him. Anyway, great game for him. But yeah, the Sixers are bad, and if this was against a good team, like we're having a very different conversation, which has me worried and should have people a little bit concerned heading into this weekend. Because, and if you want to try to put a silver or look at this in a glass half full view and bring the weekend back into the conversation, it's actually almost more encouraging that this team is just not playing good basketball right now. And you could go back to the Bulls game after the first game after the break. You can go back to the Hawks game, which was the last game before the break. It's been so long, I forget who was before. Oh, the Pacers. Pacers game, they played well. But this is now a little bit of a stretch here where, and it's strange because we kept saying, just get to the All-Star break, get some rest. And we thought coming out of the break, that's what they needed. They needed rest. They needed to recharge their batteries, and then they were going to hit the ground running for this home stretch. And that's why I think a lot of us were very excited. It's been the opposite of the case. They've come out of the All-Star break and they've played poorly. And again, glass half full, maybe it's not that they are 30 points worse than the Celtics and the Cavs. Maybe it's that they're just not playing well right now. And I think we saw a lot of that against Cleveland, and we saw a lot of that, at least for most of the game, against Boston. And obviously we saw a lot of that tonight. And then to boil it down, where are the pock marks? And I feel bad. I know I'm being very negative, and I if anybody wants to comment and be like, Macri, they won the game, feel free. I don't blame you, because I'm talking about this and I want to stop, but yet I feel compelled to point out the things that like we just witnessed, because it was an incredibly frustrating game. And then we'll end on some positives, but like to go through it, Josh Hart, I mean, finishes with 17 rebounds, including some big ones down the stretch. Had a few nice passes throughout the game. Was actually a team high in plus minus, which tells you everything you need to know about game to game plus minus. Had a couple big baskets, but there were large stretches of this game, including the entire first half, where I thought that was the worst I've ever seen Josh Hart play. To say that he had his head in the clouds. And I thought, I don't know if this is being a little bit too harsh, but I thought the difference between them being up, I think they were up 16 at the half, and then being up 25 at the half was Josh Hart. And he ended up with 7 turnovers for the game. same as the number of points that he had. And I think there might have been a couple others that you could probably put on him. I don't know what Josh Hart was doing out there. I mean, probably should have been teed off that it was not his night where he missed his first 3 free throws. Just an extraordinarily strange Josh Hart game, except we've been watching him for a couple of years, and I love Josh Hart, and we all love Josh Hart, but, like, you get this stuff from Hart sometimes, and it's frustrating, and it's especially frustrating when you see this happening, and he's not – it's the second straight game he hasn't attempted a 3. It's getting to the point now where, like, I mean, I trust that he will snap out of this and start shooting threes again, but, like, it'd be nice to see it. And he's out there doing this fakakta nonsense. And then you have Deuce McBride sitting there in a game where he plays 17 minutes. And I thought he was really good for the 17 minutes that he played. I thought he hit some big baskets. I thought, defensively was he struggling a little bit against Tyrese, obviously, to try to contain Tyrese Maxey. And that's why Hart was in the game, because you get the additional size on defense, you get the additional size on the boards. And again, 17 rebounds for Josh Hart. I'm never going to sit here and say I don't understand Tom Thibodeau's thinking, because I understand Tom Thibodeau's thinking. I understand it. But boy, oh boy, the game Josh Hart was having, and I thought the way that McBride was playing, there could have been a little bit more of a evening out of their minutes. So that was the Josh Hart of it. OG Anunoby, I can't sit here and say that I'm perplexed, because we've seen OG Anunoby look not like himself at times throughout the course of his Knicks tenure and even before his Knicks tenure. And right now, I mean, I had someone who was at the game, I think they were at the game, text me like, is he hurt? Is he disinterested? Is he tired? But that's not the version of OG Anunoby that the Knicks need to win basketball games. I thought defensively he was okay. I would have to go back and rewatch it, but like, and he finished with 16 points, but like 5 of 15 from the field, some really rough shot selection. That was not great. 1 of 6 from 3, did pull down 9 rebounds. Give him credit for that. And that was something that was called out over the weekend. Both OG and Mikal Bridges didn't pull down hardly any rebounds against those two elite teams. Mikal only 2 rebounds today, but he made up for it in other areas. So OG, a little concerning. Huck Porty, I thought we saw some nice things from Huck Porty. I thought he did his job when he was in there. I thought defensively he was really, really strong. Really strong defensive game from Ariel Huck Porty. And, of course, he gets hurt. And boy, oh boy, did you notice the difference when he wasn't out there and Precious Achiuwa was. And look, Precious, man, he is just talented enough to be maddening. You had another Precious dunk in this game. It was a cool dunk. You had one of his ISOs actually turn into something on the offensive end, not the dunk, a different one where he had like a little, I don't forget if it was a jump hook or a little fadeaway or whatever it was. The numbers for him don't look bad. 3-6, but had 4 blocks. Those were big, but 6 rebounds in 31 minutes. That tells you a lot about Precious Achiuwa. And you could tell me, yeah, but Josh Hart's getting a lot of those rebounds. One of the things you have to do if you're a Knicks center and your name isn't Karl-Anthony Towns, and by the way, Karl-Anthony Towns does this in spades, is come down with offensive rebounds. And Precious hasn't, I feel like that part of his game has been hit and miss this season. He had 2 in 31 minutes tonight. And then the offensive isolation stuff. I mean, this is not what anybody wants, but if you're sensing a theme here, and I'm going to try to pull it together now. And I thought, by the way, the bench played pretty well. McBride, especially. Payne came in, mostly did his job. Shamet kind of reverted a little bit back to form. But OG taking some bad shots, Precious taking some bad shots, Mikal Bridges needing to come out and do what he did in the first quarter. And even there were a couple of, possessions where he ended up having to take some tough ones. That basket he made, by the way, at the beginning of the fourth quarter, it gets forgotten about because of everything Jalen Brunson did. That tough 2, where it had gotten down to 6 and put it back up to 8. You forget about these baskets when it comes down to a back and forth game where you're either losing or you're tied or everything. That was a big basket in the moment. So really fantastic game offensively from Mikal Bridges. I thought defensively he was fine too. And looks a lot better, by the way. Many people have pointed this out. Mikal Bridges looks an awful lot better on defense when he's playing with a real drop big in Ariel Hukporti. So imagine what he's going to look like when he gets to play with Mitchell Robinson, presuming Mitch can make it back at some point in the near future. But all this stuff in terms of the offense, it just goes to show right now when Cat is not on the court, they don't really have an offensive identity other than Jalen Brunson go save us. And because here's the thing, like Precious is such a zero on the offensive end that you can't even pass him the ball and expect him to do something like make a quick decision, make a quick pass, make the right read, any of that stuff. And so when Brunson gets the extra attention, like defenses are smart. They know where to play off of. They know where they're playing off of. And again, if you want to criticize the coach tonight, criticize the coach tonight. For as much as Josh Hart does a lot of nice things, and for as much as Josh Hart gives you additional size for rebounding, gives you additional size for defense, can come up with a big play, a tough play, all the reasons we love Josh Hart. If you counterbalance that with the effect of having the two non-spacers, and it's not just two non-spacers, it's a non-spacer in Josh Hart and a non-entity in Precious Achiuwa. The offense just, it gets so hard. And so what are you left with? You're left with a team that has made offense its identity, in large part because of the arrival of Karl-Anthony Towns, that when something is not there, and like we've had this conversation all year, who the Knicks' most indispensable player, and we've gone back and forth on this, and like obviously Brunson is Brunson. You just saw everything that Brunson does. I don't need to sit here and extol his virtues. Guy's going to be an MVP candidate again, or at least he should be on end up top 5 in ballots. But without Towns on the floor, it becomes a slog. And then to relate it, and there's the last point I want to make here. That's, I think, when a lot of fans this year have lamented the fact that they don't have a defensive identity. And I've responded to many of these people being like, it's all right. Just be good enough on defense. Look at the offense. Well, that's great when the offense is going. And I'm not saying you should plan your season around anticipating someone should get hurt, but it is a concern because Karl-Anthony Towns always misses games. And again, you can relate this back to Tibbs, because why was Karl-Anthony Towns in the game the other night at the end of the game? So tough sledding, and they don't have right now that defensive backbone to fall back on when the offense isn't there, and that's frustrating. You hope the return of Mitchell Robinson helps change that. I still think there's a little bit more to it than that. I still think that there is something about this group defensively that has not quite fully been there this year, at least the starting five. At least the starting five. When those three wings defensively together, I'm not blaming any one of them. Collectively, they have not had the impact that they're supposed to have. And that maybe is a weird takeaway from this game, but it is one of the things that I took away from it, because when the Sixers were making their push and the Knicks were struggling on offense, I thought the Knicks did have trouble stopping them. So, again, kind of a hodgepodge game. I know I'm kind of all over the place with this stuff. At the end of the day, the Knicks have Jalen Brunson, and that is what matters most. Because as long as they have that guy, I've said this many times on many post games this year, I will say it many times on many other post games into the future. As long as the Knicks have Jalen Brunson, they are in the conversation. Doesn't mean everything's perfect. Doesn't mean that they're favorites. Doesn't mean that they're even real contenders. But they're always going to be right there. They're going to be right there in the conversation. And at the very least, in any given game, he gives them a chance to be there at the end. And if they're in it at the end, well, there's not a better guy in the league that you'd rather have on your side. And thank goodness he was on our side tonight. 9 straight points, 14 total points in the fourth quarter. Ended up 15 for 16 from the free throw line. And just absolutely captain clutch. Thank goodness for Jalen Brunson.